I gave my daughter Olivia 40 years of unconditional love and support. I sold my beloved antique collection to pay for her college tuition, postponed my retirement to help with her mortgage down payment, and even moved across the country to help raise her children when her husband's job required constant travel. Yet the moment I mentioned having trouble remembering where I placed my checkbook, she began treating me like I'd lost my mind completely. Little did she know that while I may occasionally misplace my reading glasses, my memory for betrayal remains crystal clear, and the day she tried to take control of my finances was the day I decided to rewrite my will entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Eleanor Price, 72 years young with silver hair. I've earned through decades of hard work and life experience. I spent 35 years as a high school mathematics teacher before retiring with a modest pension and careful savings. My husband Thomas passed away 8 years ago, leaving me comfortable but hardly wealthy, or so my daughter believed. What Olivia never knew was that Thomas had been quietly investing in small tech startups since the early 1990s, guided by his former student who became a venture capitalist. When several of those investments paid off spectacularly, we kept our lifestyle unchanged, preferring to live simply while our portfolio grew in the background. After Thomas died, I maintained our modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Lancaster, keeping to myself and enjoying my garden, book club, and weekly bridge games. I volunteered at the community center teaching financial literacy to young adults, a particular point of pride for me. I'd always handled our household finances with meticulous attention, balancing our checkbook to the penny and filing taxes with mathematical precision that even impressed our accountant. Olivia lives in Millfield, about 40 minutes away in May, a sprawling 5-bedroom home with her husband James and their 2 children, Emma and Noah. While I cherished my independence, I never hesitated to drive over whenever she needed help. When Emma was born with respiratory issues, I stayed with them for 3 months, waking up for every midnight breathing treatment. When James traveled to Singapore for 6 weeks, I moved in temporarily to manage the household. When Noah needed extra math tutoring, I drove through blizzards twice weekly to work with him after school. Last spring, I had a minor fender bender while backing out of the grocery store parking lot. Nothing serious, just a small dent in my bumper and a scraped taillight. The other driver was perfectly understanding, and we exchanged information amicably. When I mentioned this to Olivia during our weekly Sunday dinner, her reaction was immediate and alarming. "Mom, you shouldn't be driving anymore," she declared, setting down her fork with a decisiveness that silenced the dinner table. "This is exactly what Dad and I worried about." I was taken aback. "Olivia, it was a tiny scrape while parking. It could happen to anyone." She exchanged a look with James that made my stomach tighten. It was a look I recognized, the same one Thomas and I used to share when discussing a student who needed special attention. "It's not just the accident, Mom," she continued, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to dread. "Last month you couldn't find your checkbook, remember? And then there was that electric bill you forgot to pay." "I didn't forget to pay it," I corrected her calmly. "There was a postal delay. I showed you the postmark." James cleared his throat. "Eleanor, we're just concerned. These small incidents add up." "What incidents?" I asked, genuinely confused. "One parking scrape and a delayed bill?" Olivia sighed dramatically. "You forgot Emma's birthday last year." "I did not forget her birthday," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "I was down with pneumonia and called to explain I couldn't make it to the party. I sent her gift the following week when I recovered." "See, this is exactly what I mean," Olivia said to James as if I weren't present. "She doesn't even remember forgetting." The conversation spiraled from there. According to Olivia, I was showing clear signs of cognitive decline. She'd apparently been keeping a list of my concerning behaviors, a misplaced phone here, a forgotten name there. Normal, everyday occurrences that happen to people of all ages suddenly transformed into evidence of my deteriorating mental faculties. By dessert, Olivia had moved from diagnosis to treatment. "Mom, James and I think it's time we talked about your finances." I set down my spoon, ice cream suddenly tasteless. "What about them?" "We should probably take over managing them for you," she said, "just to make sure everything's being handled properly." James nodded along encouragingly. "We could set up a joint account. That way we could monitor your spending and make sure your bills are paid on time." "My bills are always paid on time," I replied, the exception of the delayed electric bill, notwithstanding. "And my spending doesn't need monitoring." Olivia reached across the table and patted my hand condescendingly. "Mom, you don't need to be embarrassed. Everyone needs help eventually. We're just trying to make things easier for you." I withdrew my hand. "I appreciate your concern, but my finances are in perfect order." "Really?" Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Then why did I get a call from Rachel Winston saying she saw you looking confused at the ATM last week? You were standing there for 15 minutes trying to remember your PIN." Rachel Winston, the neighborhood gossip whose daughter I'd failed in Algebra 2 20 years ago. "I wasn't confused," I explained. "The ATM was malfunctioning. I was waiting for it to reset, and then I used a different machine." Olivia exchanged another knowing look with James. "Mom, it's okay to admit you're struggling. There's no shame in it." But there was no convincing them. By the end of dinner, Olivia had not only decided I needed financial supervision, but also suggested it might be time to downsize to a senior living facility where I could get proper care. I drove home that evening with a heavy heart and shaking hands. As I entered my quiet house, the home where I'd raised Olivia, where Thomas and I had shared our life together, I felt a profound sense of violation. Not just from the unfounded accusations about my mental capacity, but from the realization that my daughter saw me as nothing more than a burden to manage, an asset to control, and eventually, an inheritance to collect. I sat in Thomas's old, leather armchair and allowed myself a good, long cry. Then I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. If Olivia wanted to treat me like an incompetent child, I would show her exactly how sharp my mind remained. The next morning, I woke up early, dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit I'd worn to school board meetings, and drove to the office of Patricia Winters, the estate attorney who had handled Thomas's will. I'd known Patricia for decades. Our children had attended the same schools, and she'd been in my advanced placement calculus class in 1987. "Mrs. Price, what a lovely surprise," Patricia greeted me, rising from behind her desk with a warm smile. "What brings you in today?" "I need to make some changes to my will, Patricia," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "Significant ones." Patricia's expression turned professional as she pulled out a legal pad. "Of course. Why don't you tell me what you have in mind?" For the next hour, I outlined my plans in detail. Patricia listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never once suggesting I might not be of sound mind to make these decisions. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "This is certainly a departure from your current arrangements," she observed. "May I ask what prompted these changes?" I explained the dinner conversation with Olivia and James, the baseless concerns about my cognitive abilities, and their transparent attempt to gain control of my finances. As I spoke, Patricia's expression hardened. "I see," she said when I finished. "Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon. I've seen many families rush to take control of an elder's assets at the first perceived sign of decline, real or imagined." "I'm not in decline," I said firmly. "I can see that quite clearly," Patricia replied with a smile. "You're as sharp as you were when you were calculating derivatives on the blackboard. Now let's talk about how to protect your assets and your autonomy." Over the next few weeks, with Patricia's guidance, I completely restructured my estate plan. I established an irrevocable trust for my grandchildren's education, but with strict conditions that the funds could only be accessed when they reached college age and only for educational expenses. I created a charitable foundation in Thomas's, named to support mathematics education in underserved communities, something he had always been passionate about. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I designated a significant portion of my estate to my sister Janet, who had always shown me nothing but genuine love and respect. As for Olivia, I didn't cut her out entirely. That would be too obvious and potentially contestable. Instead, I left her a modest but respectable sum that represented about 10% of my actual wealth. The rest would be distributed according to my new plans, with Patricia serving as executor rather than Olivia as originally intended. I also took steps to protect myself while living. I updated my power of attorney documents, removing Olivia, and naming Janet instead. I consolidated accounts, upgraded security measures, and documented my current mental capacity with both my primary physician and an independent neurologist, both of whom confirmed I showed no signs of cognitive impairment. With my legal affairs in order, I turned my attention to my day-to-day life. I enrolled in a defensive driving course to sharpen my skills behind the wheel. I upgraded my smartphone and took a class at the community center to ensure I was comfortable with all its features. I even hired a personal trainer who specialized in working with seniors to improve my strength and balance. If Olivia was going to scrutinize my every move for signs of decline, I would give her nothing to find. In fact, I would thrive. 2 months after that fateful Sunday dinner, I invited Olivia and her family over for lunch. I prepared everything myself, a gourmet meal featuring recipes I'd learned in the cooking class I'd recently started. The house was immaculate, my appearance polished, and my mind razor-sharp. As we sat down to eat, Olivia looked around with surprise. "Mom, the house looks amazing. Did you hire a cleaning service?" "No, dear," I replied pleasantly. "Just my usual Saturday cleaning routine." "And this meal, did you make all this yourself?" James asked, clearly impressed by the coq au vin and roasted vegetables before him. "Every bite," I confirmed. "My cooking instructor says I have a natural talent for French cuisine." Olivia nearly choked on her water. "Cooking instructor? When did you start taking cooking classes?" "About 6 weeks ago," I said. "Right around the same time I started my yoga class, my technology workshop, and my defensive driving course." "Oh, and I've been volunteering at the Literacy Center on Thursdays." Olivia stared at me, fork suspended midair. "That sounds like a lot." "It keeps me busy," I said with a smile. "Active body, active mind. Isn't that what they say?" Throughout lunch, I deliberately steered the conversation toward complex topics: current events, the book I was reading about quantum physics, and the stock market performance I'd been tracking. I spoke clearly and confidently, never once losing my train of thought or fumbling for words. As I served dessert, a perfectly executed crème brûlée, I could see the wheels turning in Olivia's mind. This was not the doddering old woman she had tried to paint me as. "Mom," she finally said, setting down her spoon, "you seem different." "Different how?" I asked innocently. "Just more energetic, more yourself," she said, struggling to articulate the disconnect between her narrative about me and the reality sitting before her. "I've always been myself, Olivia," I replied. "Perhaps you just haven't been seeing me clearly." There was an uncomfortable silence before Noah, bless his 13-year-old heart, broke the tension by asking if I could help him with his algebra homework after lunch. I happily agreed, and for the next hour, I guided him through quadratic equations with the same precision and patience I'd employed throughout my teaching career. When Olivia and James were preparing to leave, I casually mentioned that I had recently updated my will. "Your will?" Olivia repeated, freezing in the act of putting on her coat. Why would you do that? Just standard estate planning, I said, lightly. It's important to keep these things current. Patricia Winters helped me ensure everything is in proper order. But why didn't you discuss this with me first? Olivia demanded, her voice rising slightly. I thought I was going to be your executor. Circumstances change, I said. Patricia has the expertise, and this arrangement simplifies things for everyone. What else did you change? She pressed, her face flushing. That's between me and my attorney, I replied firmly. But don't worry, you're still included. The word included rather than primary beneficiary wasn't lost on her. For the first time that day, I saw genuine concern in her eyes. Not concern for my well-being, but for her inheritance. Mom, I hope you didn't make any rash decisions because of our conversation about your finances, she said, trying to keep her tone light. We were just worried about you. Nothing rash, I assured her. Everything was carefully considered and documented. Patricia made sure I understood all aspects of my decisions. But, Olivia, I interrupted gently, but firmly, my finances and my estate planning are not up for discussion or committee approval. They are my responsibility and mine alone. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. Of course. I just want what's best for you. I know exactly what's best for me, I said, and I'm perfectly capable of managing it myself. After they left, I sat in my garden watching the sunset and reflecting on the day. There was no satisfaction in seeing Olivia's dismay about the will, only a sad recognition that our relationship had fundamentally changed. She had revealed how she truly saw me, not as a person with dignity and autonomy, but as an aging parent to be managed and eventually inherited from. The following week, Olivia called more frequently than she had in years. Suddenly, she was inviting me to lunch, offering to take me shopping, suggesting we get manicures together. It was transparent, of course. This newfound attentiveness directly coincided with the news about my updated will. During one of these outings, while we were having coffee at a cafe downtown, Olivia finally broached the subject directly. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation a few months ago, she began cautiously. I think I may have overreacted about your driving and your finances. Oh, I said, stirring my cappuccino. Yes, I can see now that you're managing everything just fine, she continued. Better than fine, actually. You seem to be thriving. I nodded, waiting for her to get to the point. So I was thinking, since everything is going so well, maybe you don't need to make any big changes to your will or your financial arrangements, she suggested. We could go back to the original plan where I help manage things when needed. I set down my spoon and looked directly into my daughter's eyes. Olivia, let me be very clear. The changes to my will and my financial arrangements are final. They reflect my wishes and my values. They are not negotiable or reversible. Her face fell, the pleasant facade cracking. But Mom, we've always talked about how you would leave the house to us, so Emma and Noah could go to the good schools in this district, and we were counting on your retirement accounts to help with their college. Plans change, I said simply. My grandchildren will be well provided for through the educational trust I've established, but my estate is mine to direct as I see fit. This isn't fair, she said, her voice rising. Dad would have wanted— Your father, I interrupted, would have been appalled by how quickly you tried to strip me of my autonomy at the first sign of what you perceived as weakness. Thomas believed in respecting people's dignity, especially as they aged. That's not what I was doing, she protested weakly. Wasn't it? I asked. The moment you thought I was becoming forgetful, you didn't offer support or tools to help me remain independent. You immediately jumped to taking control of my finances and suggesting I move into a facility. That's not concern, Olivia. That's convenience. Tears welled in her eyes, whether from guilt or frustration I couldn't tell. You're my mother. I love you. I know you do, in your way, I said more gently. But love without respect isn't enough. You need to see me as a whole person with the right to make my own decisions, even if you disagree with them. So what happens now? She asked, blinking back tears. Now we have a choice, I said. We can either rebuild our relationship based on mutual respect, or we can continue this transactional dynamic where your attention correlates directly with what you think you'll inherit. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, stirring her untouched tea. Finally, she looked up at me, and I saw something shift in her expression, a recognition, perhaps, of how transparently self-interested her behavior had been. I never meant to make you feel disrespected, she said softly. Intentions matter less than actions, I replied. But going forward, your actions can change. That conversation marked a turning point. Over the following months, our relationship slowly began to transform. It wasn't immediate or perfect. Olivia occasionally slipped into her old patronizing habits, and I sometimes responded with more defensiveness than necessary. But gradually, we established a new foundation. Instead of offering to help with my finances, Olivia began asking me for advice about her own investments. Rather than suggesting I couldn't drive, she occasionally asked if she could join me on errands because she enjoyed my company. Small steps, but meaningful ones. One evening, about a year after I'd changed my will, Olivia came to visit me alone. She sat in Thomas's old chair, something she'd never done before, and looked at me with clear eyes. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. A real one, not just because I'm worried about inheritance. I set aside my book and gave her my full attention. I got scared, she continued. When Dad died, it hit me that someday I would lose you too. And instead of facing that fear, I tried to control it by controlling you. I convinced myself I was being helpful, but really I was just protecting myself from the idea of you changing, of you becoming someone who needed me instead of someone I could rely on. Her honesty took me by surprise. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. I don't know what changes you made to your will, she said, and I don't need to know. It's your money, your life, your decision. I just want you to know that whatever happens with all that, I'm sorry, and I want to do better. In that moment, I saw a glimmer of the thoughtful, empathetic daughter I'd raised, the one who had somehow gotten lost in the adult consumed by her own needs and fears. That means a lot to me, I said sincerely. We talked long into the evening, really talked, as we hadn't in years, about her fears for her own aging, about my grief for Thomas, about the complexities of parents and children trying to navigate the inevitable role reversals that time brings. I didn't tell her that night, but a few weeks later, I visited Patricia Winters again. I didn't completely revert my will to its original state. The educational trust for my grandchildren and the charitable foundation in Thomas's name were important to me and would remain. But I did increase Olivia's portion significantly and added back certain sentimental items I knew meant a lot to her, not because she had manipulated me into it, but because I recognized that she was genuinely trying to see me as a whole person again, not just as an aging parent or a future inheritance. The irony isn't lost on me. It took changing my will to change our relationship, to force both of us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we saw each other and ourselves. In trying to protect my autonomy, I ultimately helped restore something far more valuable: mutual respect between a mother and daughter who had temporarily lost their way. I still drive my own car. I still manage my own finances. I still live in the home where I raised my family. And now, when Olivia visits, she sees me, truly sees me, not as a declining elder to be managed, but as Eleanor Price, mother, teacher, widow, and woman of undiminished dignity and worth. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give to those who underestimate us is the opportunity to see us clearly at last. And sometimes Remembering to change your will is really about helping others change their perspective. After my meeting with Patricia Winters, I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. The house felt different somehow. No longer just the comfortable shelter I'd inhabited for decades, but a fortress I needed to defend. I walked through each room, running my fingers along the familiar surfaces. The kitchen counter where I'd helped Olivia with her homework. The living room mantel displaying faded photographs of happier times. Thomas's study, still arranged exactly as he left it, his reading glasses perched atop a dog-eared copy of The Grapes of Wrath. This was my home, my life, my autonomy, and I would not relinquish control of any of it without a fight. That evening, Janet called. My younger sister has always possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something is wrong. "Ellie, what's going on?" she asked without preamble. "I had a dream about you last night, and I woke up feeling like I needed to check in." I hesitated, suddenly embarrassed. Admitting that my own daughter thought I was losing my mental faculties felt like confessing a shameful failure in my parenting. "It's nothing," I said. "Just a disagreement with Olivia." Janet's skeptical silence spoke volumes. "Fine," I relented. "Olivia thinks I'm becoming senile because I misplaced my checkbook and had a minor fender bender. She and James want to take over my finances and are suggesting I should consider assisted living." Janet's sharp intake of breath carried clearly through the phone line. "That's absurd. You're the most mentally organized person I know. You still do the New York Times crossword in pen, for heaven's sake." Her immediate defense loosened something, tight in my chest. "Thank you for that. It's nice to have someone believe in my cognitive abilities." "This isn't about your cognitive abilities, Ellie. This is about control." Janet's voice had taken on the same fiercely protective tone she'd used when defending me from playground bullies 60 years earlier. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing yet, but I've revised my will with Patricia Winters." "Good," Janet said, firmly. "What changes did you make?" I detailed my new estate plan, including the educational trust for my grandchildren, the charitable foundation in Thomas's name, and the significantly reduced inheritance for Olivia. "And I've named you as my power of attorney instead of Olivia," I added. There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure about that, Ellie?" "I'm honored, but that's a big responsibility." "There's no one I trust more," I said simply, "and I've already seen how Olivia would wield that power." "Have you told her about these changes?" "Not specifically, just that I've updated my will." Janet sighed. "She's not going to take this well." "No," I agreed, "but that's not my primary concern right now." "What is your primary concern?" I considered the question carefully. "Proving to Olivia, and perhaps to myself, that I'm still completely capable of managing my own affairs, that I'm not just an elderly burden to be managed or a future inheritance to be protected." "You have nothing to prove, Ellie." "Maybe not, but I need to do this anyway." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began making a list of everything Olivia had pointed to as evidence of my cognitive decline. The misplaced checkbook, the fender bender, the delayed electric bill, the supposedly forgotten birthday. Small, ordinary incidents that happen to people of all ages, but which take on an ominous cast when they happen to someone in their 70s. Context is everything. If a 30-year-old misplaces their wallet, they're just busy or distracted. If I do the same, I'm losing my mind. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote "Action Plan" at the top. Then I began listing concrete steps I could take to both improve my actual functioning and, perhaps more importantly, manage others' perceptions of my capabilities. First on the list, get a complete physical and cognitive assessment. Not because I believed there was anything wrong with my memory, but because having official documentation of my mental acuity would provide powerful evidence if Olivia tried to challenge my independence in the future. I called my primary care physician, Dr. Martinez, the next morning and scheduled a comprehensive checkup. I was direct about my concerns. My daughter seems to think I'm experiencing cognitive decline, I explained. I'd like a thorough evaluation to either confirm her concerns or put them to rest. Dr. Martinez, who had been my physician for over 15 years, sounded surprised. Based on our interactions, I've never observed any signs of cognitive impairment, Eleanor. But I'm happy to arrange a formal assessment if it would give you peace of mind. 2 days later, I underwent a battery of tests, blood work, neurological examination, and a detailed cognitive assessment that evaluated everything from my memory and attention to my problem-solving abilities and language skills. A week after that, I sat in Dr. Martinez's office reviewing the results. Physically, you're in excellent health for a woman of your age, she said, flipping through my chart. Blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, all well controlled. Your reflexes and coordination are good. No neurological red flags whatsoever. I nodded, unsurprised but relieved nonetheless. As for the cognitive assessment, she continued, you scored in the 95th percentile for your age group. Your memory function, both short and long-term, is exceptional. Your processing speed and executive function are well above average. Honestly, Eleanor, your brain is functioning better than many of my patients 20 years younger. Could I get that in writing? I asked. Dr. Martinez looked up, her expression questioning. Just as a precaution, I explained. In case there are future discussions about my capacity. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She'd been practicing long enough to recognize family dynamics at play. Of course, I'll prepare a formal report, detailing these findings that you can keep for your records. Thank you, I said. And could you perhaps send a copy directly to Patricia Winters, my attorney? Certainly. She made a note in my chart, then set it aside and leaned forward, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Eleanor, may I speak frankly? I nodded. I've seen this scenario play out many times over my career. An older adult, completely capable and independent, whose children suddenly decide they know better. Sometimes it comes from a place of genuine concern. Other times, she hesitated. Other times there are less altruistic motivations. Like access to my finances? I suggested. Exactly, she said. I'm not saying that's what's happening in your case. It might be, I admitted. I've recently discovered I'm worth considerably more than my daughter realized. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. Then I'm even more glad you're taking these precautionary steps. Document everything. Keep copies of all your medical records. Consider establishing relationships with professionals, financial advisors, attorneys, even geriatric care managers, who can serve as objective third parties if your capacity is ever formally questioned. Her advice aligned perfectly with the strategy I was already forming. That's exactly what I intend to do. Good, she said, then glanced at her watch. Oh, one more thing before you go. The Senior Center is starting a new brain fitness program next month. Cognitive exercises, memory training, that sort of thing. Not because you need it, but because staying mentally active is beneficial for everyone, regardless of their baseline function. Would you like me to put your name on the list? I smiled. Please do. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing that would interest me. With my clean bill of physical and cognitive health securely documented, I moved on to the next item on my action plan, creating systems to ensure I wouldn't experience the kinds of minor memory lapses that had given Olivia ammunition. I purchased a smart tablet and spent a weekend teaching myself how to use it effectively. I downloaded apps for calendar management, medication reminders, though I only took a daily multivitamin and occasional ibuprofen, and financial organization. I set up automatic bill payments for all my recurring expenses, with confirmation emails sent to my account. I invested in a key finder device that I attached to my keychain and a special hook by the door where my keys would always go when not. in use. For my checkbook, the misplacement of which had been a key piece of evidence in Olivia's case against me, I designated a specific drawer in my desk, lined with bright red contact paper to make it visually distinctive. I began keeping a detailed log of all financial transactions, both electronic and paper, cross-referencing them against my bank statements monthly. None of these systems were actually necessary for my functioning. I'd managed my household perfectly well for decades without them. But they provided an additional layer of security against the ordinary human errors that everyone makes occasionally, but which, in my case, could be weaponized against me. Next on my list, physical fitness. Dr. Martinez had confirmed I was in good health, but I knew I could be stronger, more flexible, more visibly vital. The health club near my home offered a senior fitness program, and I signed up immediately. 3 mornings a week, I joined a group of men and women roughly my age for strength training, balance exercises, and gentle cardio workouts. The first few sessions left me sore in muscles I'd forgotten I had, but I persisted. By the 3rd week, I could feel my body responding, standing straighter, moving more fluidly, requiring less recovery time between exercises. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Denise who couldn't have been more than 30, began using me as an example for proper form during the more challenging movements. Look at Eleanor's plank position, everyone. That's what we're aiming for. Straight line from head to heels, core engaged. The pride I felt in these small physical accomplishments surprised me. I'd never been particularly athletic, having focused most of my life on intellectual pursuits. But now, each additional second I could hold a plank, or each additional pound I could lift, felt like a victory. Not just over the inevitable effects of aging, but over the narrative Olivia was trying to impose on me. I was not declining. I was improving. With my physical health, cognitive status, and organizational systems addressed, I turned my attention to perhaps the most important part of my action plan: building a network of support and witnesses outside my immediate family. People who knew me, interacted with me regularly, and could truthfully testify to my capabilities if necessary. I doubled down on my existing social connections, my weekly bridge group, my book club, my volunteer work at the Literacy Center. But I also sought out new communities and activities. I joined a community garden, tending a small plot of herbs and vegetables alongside neighbors of all ages. I enrolled in a continuing education course at the local community college. Financial. Planning in retirement. Both for the practical knowledge and for the regular interaction with the instructor and other students. And I made a point of becoming more visible in my everyday transactions. Rather than using the self-checkout at the grocery store, I chose the same cashier each week, making small talk about the weather or local events. I visited my bank in person, rather than doing all my banking online, gradually building rapport with the branch manager and tellers. I scheduled quarterly review meetings with my financial advisor, asking detailed questions about my investments and discussing market trends. These interactions served multiple purposes. They kept me socially engaged and mentally stimulated. They built a network of people who regularly observed my functioning. And perhaps most importantly, they created a paper trail and witness pool. That would make it very difficult for anyone to claim I was reclusive, confused, or incapable of managing my affairs. Throughout all of this, Olivia remained unaware of the full extent of my activities. We spoke on the phone once or twice a week, and she and her family came for dinner every other Sunday. But our conversations remained superficial. She'd ask about my week, and I'd mention a bridge game or volunteer shift at the Literacy Center, but I didn't detail my comprehensive medical evaluations, my new exercise regimen, or my expanding social network. I was rebuilding my life and securing my independence, but I wasn't doing it for show. These changes were for me, not for Olivia's approval or reassurance. 6 weeks after that fateful Sunday dinner where she'd first suggested taking over my finances, Olivia called on a Wednesday evening, her voice tense. "Mom, I just got a call from Aunt Janet. She said she's coming to visit next month." That's right, I confirmed. She'll be staying with me for 2 weeks. Why didn't you tell? Me? Olivia asked, a hint of accusation in her tone. I'm telling you now, I said mildly. Janet just confirmed her flights yesterday. But you didn't even mention you were thinking about having her visit. I wasn't aware I needed to clear my guests with you, Olivia. There was a pause on the line. That's not what I meant, she said, her voice softening slightly. I just thought, with everything going on, you might want some help preparing for a house guest. Everything going on? I repeated. What exactly is going on that would prevent me from hosting my own sister? Another pause. Nothing, I guess. I just worry about you overdoing it. I appreciate the concern, but I'm perfectly capable of changing sheets and stocking the refrigerator. I kept my tone light, but firm. Janet and I are looking forward to spending some time together. It's been almost 2 years since her last visit. Of course, Olivia said quickly. It'll be nice to see her too. We could have her over for dinner one night. I'm sure she'd enjoy that. There was an awkward silence before Olivia spoke. Again. Mom, I've been meaning to ask. Have you given any more thought to what we discussed about your finances? James and I were talking, and we think a joint account might be the simplest solution. So that was the real purpose of her call. Not Janet's visit, but another attempt to gain access to my accounts. I've given it plenty of thought, I said carefully. And I've made my decision. My finances will remain exactly as they are, under my sole control. But Mom, this isn't up for discussion, Olivia, I interrupted, my voice gentle but unyielding. I've managed my money successfully for over 50 years. There's no reason I can't continue to do so. I'm just trying to help, she protested. What if something happens to you? What if there's an emergency? Patricia Winters has copies of all my important documents, including my advanced healthcare directive and power of attorney, I explained. In case of emergency, everything is arranged. Your lawyer? Olivia's voice rose slightly. Why would you give those documents to her instead of your own daughter? Because that's what estate attorneys are for, I said simply. They maintain important documents and ensure they're properly executed when necessary. What I didn't say was that I'd specifically instructed Patricia not to reveal that Janet, not Olivia, was now my designated power of attorney. That conversation could wait for another day, preferably when Olivia had demonstrated she could respect my autonomy. I still think, Olivia began, but I cut her off. I know what you think, dear. You've made your position very clear, but the decision is made. After we hung up, I sat holding the phone for several minutes, a familiar mix of sadness and frustration washing over me. When had my bright, compassionate daughter become so fixated on controlling me? Was it simply the natural worry of a child watching a parent age? Or was there something more self-interested at play? The uncomfortable question that kept surfacing in my mind was whether Olivia's sudden concern about my cognitive abilities had coincided with her learning about the substantial sum Thomas had left me. The timing was suspicious, to say the least. 2 months before our confrontation at Sunday dinner, I'd casually mentioned to Olivia that I was considering a cruise to Alaska, something Thomas and I had always talked about doing but never gotten around to. That sounds lovely, Mom, she'd said at the time. But aren't those cruises expensive? I'd hate to see you spending your savings on something like that when you might need that money for healthcare later. Don't worry about that, I'd replied. Your father left me very well. Provided for? Her eyebrows had shot up. Really? I thought Dad's life insurance policy was only for $100,000. The life insurance was just part of it, I'd explained. He also had quite a substantial investment portfolio that's continued to perform well. I hadn't elaborated further, but I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes. And within weeks, the comments about my supposedly failing memory had begun. A coincidence? Perhaps. But mothers develop a sixth sense about their children's motivations. And something about Olivia's sudden concern felt off. The following weekend, I decided to test my theory. I invited Olivia and James over for a casual lunch on Saturday, just the three of us, without the grandchildren. I prepared a simple meal: soup, sandwiches, and a fresh fruit salad. Nothing elaborate that might suggest special effort or occasion. As we sat down to eat, I deliberately steered the conversation toward my financial situation. "I've been thinking about my investment strategy," I said casually. "With the market being so volatile lately, I'm wondering if I should reallocate some of my holdings." James, who worked in corporate finance, immediately perked up. "What are you currently invested in?" he asked, his interest clearly piqued. "Oh, a mixture of things," I said vaguely. "Some blue-chip stocks, some bonds, a couple of mutual funds. Thomas set most of it up years ago, and I've just left it as is." "How much are we talking about, if you don't mind my asking?" James pressed, trying to keep his tone conversational, but not quite succeeding. Olivia shot him a warning glance. Too direct, too soon. But she was clearly waiting for my answer as well. "Well, the last time I checked, the portfolio was valued at around $3 million, I said, deliberately understating the actual amount by about half. Plus the house, of course, which is fully paid off. I watched their reactions carefully. James couldn't quite suppress a look of surprise, quickly, followed by something that looked uncomfortably like calculation. Olivia maintained better control of her expression, but I noticed her posture straighten, her attention sharpen. "That's quite substantial," James said after a moment. "And you're managing all of this yourself?" "For the most part," I said. "I have a financial advisor I consult with quarterly, but day-to-day decisions are mine." "Don't you find that stressful?" Olivia asked, her voice laced with artificial concern. "Keeping track of all those investments? Dad always handled that sort of thing, didn't he?" "Your father made the initial investments," I corrected her, "but we always discussed financial decisions together. I've been balancing my own checkbook and managing my own money since I was 18 years old, Olivia. It's hardly a new skill for me." "Still," James interjected, "with that kind of portfolio, you might benefit from more active management. I'd be happy to look things over for you, give you some recommendations." "That's very kind," I said, smiling pleasantly, "but unnecessary. My advisor at Meridian Wealth Management is excellent. 20 years of experience, impeccable track record." "Meridian?" James repeated, clearly impressed despite himself. Meridian was one of the most exclusive wealth management firms in the ICE region, known for their selective client list and exceptional returns. "I didn't realize you were working with them." "Thomas established the relationship years ago," I explained. "They've been very good to me since his passing." Throughout this exchange, I watched Olivia's face carefully. She was trying to maintain a neutral expression, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, recalculating, reassessing. $3 million was significantly more than she'd likely believed I was worth. But it was also, apparently, enough to intensify her interest in helping manage my affairs. "Mom," she said finally, setting down her soup spoon, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about long-term planning. With that kind of money at stake, we need to make sure everything is properly protected and allocated for your future. Eads." And there it was, the confirmation of my suspicions. Not, "Wow, Mom, I'm so glad Dad left you so well off," or, "That's wonderful that you have such financial security." Instead, it was immediately about control, about her perceived need to manage my wealth. "My long-term planning is already taken care of," I said calmly. "Patricia Winters has helped me set up a comprehensive estate plan that addresses all contingencies." "Without consulting us?" Olivia asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I wasn't aware I needed your permission to establish my own legal arrangements, Olivia." James, perhaps sensing the rising tension, attempted to redirect the conversation. Eleanor, we're just concerned about making sure everything is optimized for your benefit. Tax considerations, healthcare planning, estate implications. These are complex matters. They are indeed, I agreed. Which is why I've worked with professional advisors who specialize in exactly those areas. But as your family, Olivia began. As my family, I interrupted gently. Your role is to respect my decisions, not to remake them according to your preferences. A flash of something, frustration, anger, crossed Olivia's face before she composed herself. Of course, Mom. We just want what's best for you. I know you think you do, I said, my voice softening slightly. But what's best for me is maintaining my independence and autonomy for as long as I'm capable of doing so. And according to every medical and cognitive assessment I've recently undergone, that capacity is not in question. Olivia's eyebrows shot up. Medical assessments? What medical assessments? I've had a complete physical and cognitive evaluation, I explained. Dr. Martinez can provide you with the detailed results if you're genuinely concerned, but the short version is that I'm in excellent health, both physically and mentally. You never mentioned you were having tests done, Olivia said, sounding almost accusatory. There are many things I don't mention, Olivia. I'm a separate person with my own life, not an extension of yours. The remainder of lunch passed in strained conversation about safer topics, the grandchildren's activities, James's work, the unseasonably warm weather. But the underlying tension remained, humming just below the surface of our interaction. After they left, I sat in my garden, reflecting on what had just transpired. The experiment had confirmed my worst fears. Olivia's sudden concern about my cognitive abilities and her push to take over my finances were directly correlated with her perception of my net worth. The more I was worth, the more urgently she felt the need to control me. It was a painful realization that my own daughter saw me primarily as an asset to be managed rather than as a person to be respected. But it also strengthened my resolve to protect myself and preserve my independence. That evening, I called Janet. The plan is working, I told her after describing the lunch conversation. But it's also revealed something I was hoping wasn't true. That Olivia's more interested in your money than your welfare? Janet asked bluntly. Yes, I admitted, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. Or at least, her interest in my welfare seems directly proportional to her interest in my money. I'm sorry, Ellie, Janet said softly. That's a hard truth to face about your own child. It is, I agreed, but better to face it clear-eyed than to remain in denial. So what's your next move? I considered the question carefully. I need to continue building my case, documenting my capacity, securing my assets, establishing my independence beyond any reasonable doubt. But I also need to give Olivia a chance to prove me wrong about her motivations. And if she doesn't? Then I'll have to accept that our relationship has fundamentally changed, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice despite the ache in my heart. And I'll adjust my expectations and my estate plan accordingly. You're handling this with remarkable grace, Janet observed. I'd be furious. Oh, I'm furious too, I assured her. But anger alone won't solve this. I need to be strategic, not just emotional. After we hung up, I opened my journal and began writing. Not just recording the day's events, but exploring my feelings about them. The hurt, the disappointment, the sense of betrayal, but also the determination, the clarity, the growing confidence in my own capabilities. I'd spent a lifetime putting others first, my students, my husband, my daughter. Now, in my 70s, I was finally learning to prioritize myself, to stand firm in my own worth and autonomy, to say no without guilt or apology. It wasn't the lesson I'd expected to learn at this stage of life, but perhaps it was the one I needed most. The day Janet arrived was bright and clear, one of those perfect autumn mornings where the light seems to gild everything it touches. I'd spent the previous week preparing for her visit, airing out the guest room, stocking the pantry with her favorite foods, planning little excursions around town. It felt good to focus on something positive after weeks of strategizing and documenting. Janet stepped off the plane looking exactly as she always had. 5 years my junior, but often mistaken for my twin, with the same silver-streaked dark hair and hazel eyes. But where my demeanor tended toward reserved thoughtfulness, Janet radiated, a vibrant energy that turned heads even now, in her late 60s. "Ellie!" she called, waving enthusiastically as she spotted me in the terminal. We embraced tightly, and I was struck by how much I'd missed her physical presence, the familiar scent of her perfume, the sound of her laugh, the warmth of her arms around me. "You look wonderful," I said, stepping back to examine her. And she did, trim and stylish in tailored slacks and a burgundy sweater that complemented her coloring perfectly. "So do you," she replied, her eyes appraising me with equal attention. "In fact, you look better than the last time I saw you." "What have you been doing?" "There's a glow about you." I smiled, realizing she was right. The past few weeks of purposeful activity, the exercise classes, the brain training, the renewed social connections, had indeed brought a vitality I hadn't felt in years. "I'll tell you all about it on the drive home," I promised. As we collected her luggage and made our way to the parking garage, Janet kept up a steady stream of updates about her life in Arizona, her book club's latest selection, the community garden. She'd helped establish her occasional dinner dates with a retired professor named Martin who lived in her condominium complex. "Nothing serious," she assured me when I raised an eyebrow. "Just companionship. We're too old to be starting anything complicated." "Speak for yourself," I teased. 70 is the new 50, haven't you heard?" She laughed, then sobered slightly, as we reached my car. "Speaking of age, how are things with Olivia? Any developments since we last spoke?" I sighed, unlocking the doors and helping her load her suitcase into the trunk. "It's been a dance of sorts. She keeps probing, trying, to find ways to insert herself into my financial affairs. I keep deflecting, establishing boundaries. The Sunday dinners have become rather tense." Janet buckled her seatbelt and turned to face me. "And you're sure this is about money? Not just genuine concern, however misplaced?" "I tested that theory," I replied, pulling out of the parking space. "I deliberately mentioned the value of my investments, actually understating them by quite a bit. You should have seen how quickly both Olivia and James shifted into helpful mode. Suddenly, they were very concerned about optimizing my portfolio and ensuring proper long-term planning." Janet made a disgusted sound. "Always amazing how concern for elderly parents intensifies in direct proportion to their net worth." "To be fair," I said, feeling a twinge of maternal defensiveness despite everything, "I think there is some genuine worry mixed in with the financial interest. Olivia has always been a bit of a control freak. The idea of me becoming forgetful or vulnerable probably genuinely frightens her." "Perhaps," Janet conceded, "but that doesn't give her the right to steamroll over your autonomy." "No, it doesn't," I agreed, "which is why I've been building my case so meticulously." I spent the drive home detailing all the steps I'd taken, the medical evaluations, the organizational systems, the fitness regimen, the expanded social network. Janet listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or offering suggestions. "It's impressive, Ellie," she said as I finished. "You've essentially created an ironclad defense against any claim of incompetence. But what's your offense?" "Offense?" I echoed, glancing away from the road momentarily to look at her. "Yes, your proactive strategy. Defense protects your status quo, but offense moves you forward." What's your next move to affirmatively establish your independence? I hadn't thought about it quite in those terms before. I'm not sure, I admitted. What do you have in mind? Janet smiled mischievously. I have a few ideas, but first, I want to see this new yoga-practicing, weightlifting sister of mine in action. When's your next class? Tomorrow morning at 9, I said. But you just got off a long flight. Wouldn't you rather rest? And miss the chance to see you in Downward Dog? Not a chance. The next 2 weeks with Janet were transformative. She attended my exercise class, proudly cheering me on from the sidelines as I demonstrated the strength exercises I'd mastered. She joined me for my weekly bridge game, impressing my friends with her sharp strategic thinking and easy conversation. She accompanied me to the community garden, rolling up her sleeves to help weed my vegetable plot and charming the other gardeners with her knowledge of desert plants from her Arizona home. But most significantly, Janet helped me develop what she called my Declaration of Independence, a multifaceted plan to not just defend my autonomy, but to affirmatively establish a new chapter of my life, characterized by growth, engagement, and purpose. You've spent your whole life being defined by your relationships to others, she observed one evening as we sat on my back patio, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset. Thomas's wife, Olivia's mother, the math teacher. Now it's time to figure out who Eleanor Price is on her own terms. At 72? I asked, both amused and intrigued by the notion. Especially at 72, Janet replied firmly. You could easily have another 20 good years ahead of you. Why not make them the most authentic years of your life? The idea resonated deeply. I'd been so focused on proving I wasn't declining that I hadn't given much thought to how I might actually be advancing, developing new aspects of myself, exploring new possibilities, creating a future that was about more than just maintaining the status quo. Together, Janet and I brainstormed what this new chapter might look like. The conversation continued over several days, often late into the night, fueled by cups of tea and shared memories and dreams I hadn't articulated even to myself. I spoke of my lifelong love of mathematics and how I missed the intellectual challenge of engaging with complex problems. I confessed my secret interest in travel, not just the Alaska cruise I'd mentioned to Olivia, but more adventurous journeys to places I'd only read about in books. I admitted that while I cherished my quiet home, I sometimes felt isolated, cut off from the kind of vibrant intellectual and social community I'd enjoyed during my teaching years. Janet listened thoughtfully, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather-bound journal she carried. On our 5th night of these conversations, she presented what she called the Eleanor Price Renaissance Plan. That's a bit grandiose, I protested, laughing. Maybe, she conceded with a grin. But the Eleanor Price gets her groove back plan didn't have quite the same gravitas. The plan she outlined was both practical and inspiring. It built upon the foundation I'd already established, but expanded it in ways that were about fulfillment rather than just defense. First, I would leverage my mathematical expertise by becoming a volunteer tutor at the community college's STEM center, helping adult learners who struggled with the quantitative courses required for various degree programs. This would provide intellectual stimulation, meaningful contribution, and regular interaction with a diverse community of students and educators. Second, I would join the local chapter of a travel club specifically for active seniors, starting with domestic group trips and potentially expanding to international travel as my confidence grew. The structure of organized tours would provide both safety and social connection while satisfying my wanderlust. Third, I would explore turning the 3rd bedroom of my house, currently used as a catch-all storage space, into a dedicated office and project room where I could pursue my interests without distraction or interruption. This would be a tangible declaration of my intention to continue growing and creating in this new phase of life. What do you think? Janet asked after outlining these ideas. Too much? Not enough? Completely off base? I was quiet for a moment, allowing myself to envision this potential future. It wasn't about proving anything to Olivia anymore. It was about creating a life that reflected my values, interests, and capabilities. A life that would be fulfilling, on its own terms, regardless of how others perceived it. "I think it's perfect," I said finally. "But there's one element missing." "What's that?" "Financial independence, true independence," I clarified. "I need to restructure my assets in a way that protects them from potential interference while still allowing me full access and control." Janet nodded thoughtfully. "Have you discussed this with Patricia?" "Not in detail. I've been focused on the defensive measures, documenting my capacity, updating my will and power of attorney. But I think it's time for a more comprehensive approach." The next morning, I called Patricia Winters and scheduled an appointment for later that week. Janet offered to accompany me, and I gratefully accepted. Having her perspective would be valuable, and her presence would ensure I didn't overlook any important considerations. When we arrived at Patricia's office on Thursday afternoon, she greeted us both warmly, ushering us into her comfortable conference room with its leather chairs and oak table. "Janet, it's been too long," Patricia said, shaking my sister's hand. "Not since Thomas's funeral, I believe." "Unfortunately, yes," Janet agreed. "Though I'm glad to be reconnecting under more positive circumstances." Once we were settled with cups of coffee, Patricia turned to business. "Eleanor, you mentioned on the phone that you wanted to discuss further asset protection strategies. Can you tell me more specifically what you have in mind?" I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. "I'm concerned about potential challenges to my financial autonomy as I age. While I'm fully capable now and have documentation to prove it, I want to create structures that will protect my assets even if there are future questions about my capacity." Patricia nodded, her expression serious. "That's very prudent. Are there specific concerns driving this?" "Yes," I said frankly. "I believe my daughter and son-in-law may attempt to gain control of my finances under the guise of helping me. They've already made several concerted efforts in that direction." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. And you believe their motives are not entirely altruistic?" "I've tested that theory," I replied, explaining the conversation about my investment portfolio and Olivia and James's subsequent behavior. "Their interest in managing my affairs seems directly proportional to their perception of my net worth." Patricia made a few notes on her legal pad. "Unfortunately, this is not an uncommon situation. The good news is that there are several legal structures we can put in place to protect your autonomy and your assets." For the next hour, she outlined a comprehensive strategy tailored to my specific circumstances. The centerpiece would be a revocable living trust with myself as both grantor and initial trustee. My assets would be transferred into the trust, which would provide complete protection from outside interference while still giving me full control over my finances. "The beauty of this arrangement," Patricia explained, "is that you can continue managing your assets exactly as you do now, but they're shielded within the trust structure. And if there ever comes a time when you do need assistance, you'll have already designated a successor trustee of your choosing, who will step in under the specific conditions you've established." "And that successor trustee would be Janet?" I clarified. "If that's your preference, yes. Though I would recommend naming at least one alternative successor as well, in case Janet is unable to serve for any reason." I nodded, thinking through the possibilities. "My former colleague Grace Lambert would be a good choice. She has an excellent head for finances and impeccable integrity." "Perfect," Patricia said, making another note. "Now the trust will include specific provisions regarding when and how a successor trustee can assume control. We'll draft language that requires clear, documented evidence of incapacity, not just someone's opinion or concern, but actual medical certification from multiple physicians." "And this is different from the power of attorney I've already established?" Janet asked. "Yes," Patricia confirmed. The power of attorney gives Janet authority to act on your behalf in legal and financial matters if you're unable to do so. The trust actually holds and protects the assets themselves. They work in tandem to create a comprehensive safety net. She went on to recommend several additional measures. A detailed inventory of all my assets, both financial and personal. Regular updates to my advanced healthcare directive to ensure it reflected my current wishes. And a formal letter of intent that would provide guidance to my trustees regarding my values and preferences for how my assets should be managed. "What about my home?" I asked. "That's likely to be a particular point of contention, given Olivia's comments about me downsizing to assisted living." Patricia leaned back in her chair, considering. "The house can be placed in the trust like your other assets, but there's another option worth considering, a life estate." "What's that?" Janet asked. "It's a legal arrangement that would give Eleanor the absolute right to live in the home for the remainder of her life, regardless of who technically owns the property," Patricia explained. Even if ownership of the house were to transfer to Olivia or anyone else, they could not force Eleanor to leave or sell the property during her lifetime. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders at these words. My home represented so much more than just real estate. It was the physical embodiment of my independence, filled with memories of Thomas and our life together. The thought of being pressured to leave it had been a persistent worry lurking at the back of my mind. "Yes," I said decisively. "I want that protection in place." "We'll make it happen," Patricia assured me. "Now, there's one more strategy I'd like to discuss, one that might be particularly effective in your situation." She detailed a plan that was both simple and elegant. Transparency through formal disclosure. Rather than keeping my financial arrangements private, which could lead to suspicion and potential challenges, I would provide Olivia and James with an annual written summary of my financial status, prepared by Patricia's office. This would include general information about my assets, income, and major expenditures, but without giving them any control or detailed account access. "This accomplishes several things," Patricia explained. "It demonstrates your continued competence in managing your affairs. It removes the mystery that might be fueling their curiosity or concern. And most importantly, it creates a formal channel for sharing financial information that doesn't require surrendering any actual control." "It's brilliant," Janet said admiringly. "Giving them information without giving them power." "Exactly," Patricia agreed. "And if they push for more access or control beyond this reasonable accommodation, their motives become much clearer, not just to Eleanor, but to any third party who might become involved, such as a judge if this ever went to court." I mulled over the suggestion, seeing its strategic value. "When would the first disclosure take place?" "I would recommend waiting until all the other structures, the trust, the life estate, the updated directives, are firmly in place," Patricia advised. "That way, the disclosure becomes a presentation of established fact, rather than an opening for negotiation." By the end of our meeting, we had a comprehensive plan and a timeline for implementation. Patricia would draft all the necessary documents within the next 2 weeks. Janet and I would review them during her remaining time with me, and once everything was finalized, I would schedule a formal meeting with Olivia and James to present the new arrangements. As we drove home from Patricia's office, I felt a profound sense of relief and clarity. For the first time since this ordeal began, I wasn't just reacting to Olivia's attempts to control me. I was proactively creating a future on my own terms. "How do you feel?" Janet asked, noting my expression. "Liberated," I replied honestly. "Like I've been carrying a heavy suitcase uphill, and someone just offered me a ride." Janet reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's what good planning does. It doesn't change the landscape, but it makes the journey a whole lot easier." The remainder of Janet's visit flew by in a flurry of activity. We visited the community college together, where I inquired about the volunteer tutoring program and was immediately welcomed by the STEM Center coordinator, a young woman named Alicia, who seemed genuinely excited about having a retired math teacher join their team. "We have so many adult learners who struggle with math anxiety," she explained. "Someone with your experience and patience would be an incredible resource." We attended a meeting of the Senior Explorers Travel Club, where I connected with several members who shared my interest in cultural and historical destinations. A group trip to the national parks of Utah was being planned for the spring, and I tentatively added my name to the interest list, ignoring the small voice in my head that whispered, "What would Olivia think?" And we began the process of transforming the spare bedroom into my personal study. We cleared out the miscellaneous storage items, donated what I no longer needed, and rearranged the furniture to create a bright, inviting workspace. Janet, who had a flair for interior design, helped me select a comfortable desk chair, a new lamp with adjustable lighting, and colorful artwork for the walls. "Every great thinker needs a sanctuary," she declared as we stood back to admire our work. Virginia Woolf was right about that room of one's own. Throughout these activities, I maintained my regular routines, my exercise classes, my bridge games, my volunteer shifts at the literacy center. I wanted Janet to see that these weren't just temporary measures I'd adopted to prove a point, but genuine elements of a sustainable, fulfilling lifestyle. And in quieter moments, we reviewed the draft documents Patricia sent over, discussing the implications of various provisions and making small adjustments to ensure they perfectly reflected my wishes. The stack of papers, trust documents, healthcare directives, letters of intent, grew steadily on my dining room table, physical manifestations of my determination to protect my autonomy. The day before Janet was scheduled to return to Arizona, Olivia called to invite us both to dinner at her home. "Nothing fancy," she assured me. "Just family time before Aunt Janet leaves." I accepted the invitation with mixed feelings. On one hand, I wanted Janet to spend time with her niece and grandnephew before departing. On the other hand, I suspected Olivia might try to use the occasion to fish for information about our activities over the past 2 weeks. "We'll go, of course," I told Janet after hanging up. "But let's be strategic about what we share." Janet raised an eyebrow. "Are we keeping secrets now, Ellie?" "Not secrets," I clarified. "Just maintaining appropriate boundaries. I'm not ready to reveal all of our plans until everything is legally finalized." Janet nodded understandingly. "Selective disclosure it is, then." When we arrived at Olivia's home the following evening, we were greeted warmly by Emma and Noah, who immediately whisked Janet away to show her their latest school projects and activities. Olivia hugged me briefly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Mom, you look well," she said, stepping back to examine me. "Janet's visit seems to have been good for you." "It has been," I agreed. "We've had a wonderful time catching up." "What have you two been doing?" she asked, leading me into the kitchen where James was opening a bottle of wine. "I've barely heard from you all week." "Oh, this and that," I said vaguely. "Visiting, reminiscing, taking care of a few errands." I accepted the glass of white wine James offered. "Thank you. Something smells delicious." "Lasagna," James replied. "Olivia's mother's recipe." I smiled, recognizing the attempted deflection. "How nice. And how have you two been?" "Busy with work and the children, I imagine." Olivia launched into a detailed account of her week, challenges with a difficult client at her interior design firm, Noah's upcoming science fair project, Emma's debate team qualification for a regional competition. I listened attentively, asking appropriate follow-up questions while revealing very little about my own activities. When Janet rejoined us, accompanied by the children, the conversation shifted to her life in Arizona and her impressions of our town, which she hadn't visited in several years. "It's changed so much," she observed. "All those new shops downtown, the expanded community college campus. It feels more vibrant than I remember." The growth has definitely driven up property values, James commented. Real estate in this area is at a premium now. I caught the calculating look in his eye and suppressed a sigh. Always back to assets and their value. Throughout dinner, Olivia made several attempts to probe into what Janet and I had been doing during her visit. Had we gone shopping? Not really. Had we taken any day trips? Just around town. Had we seen any old friends? A few, in passing. Finally, as James served coffee and Emma cleared the dinner plates, Olivia's patience seemed to run out. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked directly. "You and Aunt Janet have clearly been up to something these past 2 weeks, and you're being weirdly secretive about it." I set down my coffee cup, meeting her gaze steadily. "We've been making plans." "Olivia, plans for my future." "What kind of plans?" she pressed. I glanced at Janet, who gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. "I've been exploring new activities and opportunities," I said carefully. "Volunteer work at the Community College STEM Center, a possible trip to Utah with a senior travel group, some reorganization of my home to better support my interests." Olivia frowned slightly. "That all sounds active. Are you sure you're not overextending yourself?" "I'm quite sure," I replied. "In fact, my doctor has encouraged me to stay engaged and active. It's beneficial for both physical and cognitive health." "And have you been to see Patricia Winters again?" James asked casually, rejoining the conversation. I kept my expression neutral, though I was surprised by the direct question. "Yes, actually. Janet accompanied me to an appointment earlier this week." "What for?" Olivia asked, her tone sharpening. "More changes to your will?" "Among other things," I acknowledged. "I've been implementing a comprehensive estate plan that will protect my assets and ensure my wishes are carried out exactly as I intend." "And do those wishes still include provisions for your family?" James inquired, trying and failing to sound merely curious rather than concerned. I took a deliberate sip of coffee before answering. "My estate plan reflects my values and priorities, which certainly include my family. But the specific details are private for now." "Private?" Olivia repeated incredulously. "From your own daughter?" "The documents are still being finalized," I explained calmly. "Once everything is in order, I'll share the relevant information with you. But I want to be clear, Olivia. My financial and legal arrangements are ultimately my decision, not a family consensus." Olivia's face flushed. "No one is saying they aren't, Mom, but most parents discuss these matters with their children. It's normal to involve family in important decisions." "That depends on the family dynamics," Janet interjected smoothly, "and on whether those discussions are truly collaborative or simply attempts to influence or control." A tense silence fell over the table. Emma and Noah exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly sensing the undercurrents of the adult conversation. James cleared his throat. "Kids, why don't you go get that game you wanted to show Aunt Janet before she leaves?" The children gratefully fled the dining room, leaving the 4 of us in charged silence. "I think I should explain something," I said finally, folding my hands on the table. "Since Thomas died, I've maintained my independence because it matters deeply to me, not just as a practical consideration, but as a core element of my identity and dignity. The recent suggestions that I might be declining cognitively or need help managing my affairs felt like threats to that independence." "Mom, we were just concerned," Olivia began. "Please let me finish," I said gently but firmly. "I understand that there may have been genuine concern mixed in with other motivations. But the effect was the same. I felt my autonomy was under attack. So yes, I've been making plans that protect my independence while still ensuring my needs are met as I age. Plans that reflect my values and priorities, not someone else's idea of what's appropriate for a woman of my age." Olivia stared. At me, her expression a complex mix of emotions: frustration, confusion, perhaps a hint of grudging respect. "And these plans don't include us?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "They include you in appropriate ways," I clarified. "But they don't give anyone power over my decisions or assets until and unless I am truly incapable of managing them myself, not just when someone thinks I might be slipping because I misplaced my checkbook." James leaned forward, his financier's mind clearly racing. "What exactly are we talking about here, Eleanor? Trusts? Asset protection strategies?" "As I said, I'll share the details once everything is finalized," I repeated. "But for now, yes, I'm implementing a comprehensive plan that includes various legal structures designed to protect both my assets and my autonomy." Olivia pushed, her coffee cup away, her movements sharp with frustration. "I still don't understand why this is all so secretive. Why can't you just tell us what you're doing with your money? We're your family." "Being family doesn't automatically grant unrestricted access to someone's financial information," Janet pointed out. "Ellie is entitled to privacy, just like anyone else." "This isn't about privacy," Olivia argued. "It's about trust. Mom clearly doesn't trust us." I met my daughter's gaze directly. "Trust is earned, Olivia, and it's a two-way street. Do you trust me to make sound decisions about my own life, or do you see me primarily as someone who needs to be managed?" The question hung in the air between us, uncomfortably direct. Olivia looked away first, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I think what Eleanor is trying to say," Janet intervened diplomatically, "is that she values her independence and wants to ensure it's protected. That doesn't mean she's excluding you from her life or her legacy, just that she's being thoughtful about establishing appropriate boundaries." James nodded slowly, a calculating look still in his eyes. "I suppose that's reasonable. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, Eleanor, that your affairs are in order." "They are in order," I assured him, more thoroughly than ever before. "And I promise, once everything is finalized, I'll share whatever information is appropriate. But I need you both to understand and respect that the final decisions are mine to make." The conversation shifted to safer topics when the children returned with a board game. But the underlying tension remained. As Janet and I prepared to leave later that evening, Olivia pulled me aside in the entryway. "Mom," she said quietly, "I hope you know that despite our disagreements, I do love you. Everything I've done has been because I care." I softened slightly at the sincerity in her voice. "I know you care, Olivia, and I love you too. But caring shouldn't mean controlling. I need you to respect my autonomy, even when you disagree with my choices." She nodded, though I could see the reservation in her eyes. "I'll try," she promised. "It's just hard to see you growing older and not want to step in and help." "I understand that," I acknowledged. "But remember, I'm not just growing older. I'm growing in new directions, and that's something to celebrate, not manage." On the drive home, Janet and I dissected the evening's conversations, analyzing what had been revealed and what had remained hidden. "They're definitely curious about your financial arrangements," Janet observed. "James especially seemed focused on the specifics." "Of course he is," I replied. "He's always been the financially oriented one. If there are trusts or other structures being established, he wants to know how they might affect his and Olivia's potential inheritance." "Well, they'll find out soon enough," Janet said. "Once Patricia finalizes everything and you have that formal disclosure meeting." I nodded, feeling a curious mix of apprehension and anticipation about that upcoming conversation. "Do you think they'll accept the new arrangements gracefully?" Janet laughed softly. "Gracefully? Probably not. But they'll accept them, because they won't have any choice. And maybe, just maybe, once they see that you've created a thoughtful, Comprehensive plan that addresses everyone's legitimate interests? They'll develop a new respect for your capabilities. That would be nice, I admitted. But even if they don't, I'll know that I've done what's necessary to protect myself and my values. And that's what matters most. As we turned onto my street, the porch light glowing welcomingly in the darkness, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for Janet's support and guidance these past 2 weeks. She had helped me transform a defensive posture into an affirmative plan for the future. A future defined not by what I was protecting against, but by what I was moving toward. "Thank you," I said simply as we pulled into the driveway. "For everything." Janet squeezed my hand. "Sisters protect each other, Ellie. Always have, always will." And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead with Olivia and James, I would face them with clarity, confidence, and the unshakable knowledge that I was not alone. The weeks following Janet's departure took on a rhythm of their own. My mornings began with either fitness class or volunteer tutoring at the community college STEM center. Afternoons were devoted to my home study, where I divided my time between reviewing financial statements, researching potential travel destinations, and working through advanced mathematics problems purely for the joy of it. Evenings brought social engagements, bridge club, community garden meetings, occasional dinners with friends both old and new. Throughout this period, I maintained cordial but somewhat distant contact with Olivia. Our Sunday dinners continued, though with an undercurrent of tension that even the children could sense. She made several attempts to discuss my financial affairs, each more transparent than the last. "Mom, I was thinking about setting up a college fund for Emma and Noah," she mentioned during one such dinner. "I thought you might have some insights, given all the financial planning you've been doing lately." "That's a wonderful idea," I replied, deliberately misinterpreting her fishing expedition as genuine interest. "The earlier you start, the better. I'd be happy to connect you with some resources on 529 plans and other educational savings options." Olivia's expression flickered with frustration before she composed herself. "Actually, I was wondering more about how you've structured your own estate planning. Janet mentioned something about trusts." "Janet should know better than to discuss my private affairs," I said mildly. "But yes, trusts can be excellent vehicles for specific purposes, including educational funding. I'm sure James's financial background gives him plenty of insight into those options." And so it went. Her increasingly direct questions met with my increasingly deft deflections. I knew I was postponing an inevitable confrontation, but I wanted all my legal protections firmly in place before having that difficult conversation. Finally, 3 weeks after Janet's departure, Patricia Winters called to inform me that all the documents were finalized, signed, notarized, and properly filed. My revocable living trust was established, with all major assets transferred into it. The life estate for my home was recorded with the county. My updated healthcare directives and power of attorney designations were officially registered. "Everything is in order, Eleanor," Patricia assured me. "Your autonomy is now legally protected on multiple fronts." "Thank you," I said, feeling a profound sense of relief. "When can we schedule the disclosure meeting with Olivia and James?" "I've prepared a comprehensive summary document for them," Patricia replied. "We can meet whenever you're ready. I'd suggest my office as neutral territory, but I'm also happy to come to your home if you'd prefer." I considered the options. Meeting at Patricia's office would emphasize the formal, legal nature of the arrangements I'd made, but hosting the conversation in my home would reinforce my confidence and independence. "Let's do it here," I decided. "Friday evening, if that works for you. I'll invite Olivia and James for 6 o'clock. "Perfect," Patricia agreed. "I'll bring all the necessary materials." After hanging up, I sat at my desk for several minutes, gathering my thoughts and emotions. This upcoming conversation would likely be difficult, perhaps even confrontational. Olivia would not easily accept the boundaries I was establishing. James would almost certainly have objections to the financial structures I'd created. But I was prepared, not just legally, but emotionally and psychologically as well. I called Olivia and extended the invitation. Dinner at my home on Friday evening, just the adults. I mentioned that Patricia Winters would be joining us afterward to discuss some important matters. "Your lawyer?" Olivia questioned immediately, suspicion evident in her voice. "Mom, what is this about?" "It's about clarity," I said simply. "I've finalized my estate plan and want to share the relevant details with you and James." There was a pause on the line. "Are we going to like what we hear?" she asked finally. "That's not my primary concern," I replied honestly. "What matters is that my wishes are clear and my affairs are in order." Another pause, longer this time. "Fine," she said eventually. "We'll be there at 6. I spent the next few days preparing, not just the practical elements like menu planning and house cleaning, but also the emotional and strategic aspects of the upcoming conversation. I reviewed my talking points with Patricia, anticipating potential objections or challenges from Olivia and James. I practiced maintaining a calm, confident demeanor even when visualizing their likely negative reactions. And I reminded myself repeatedly that this was not about punishing Olivia for her attempts to control me. It was about establishing healthy boundaries and protecting my autonomy. The goal wasn't to hurt her, but to help her understand that our relationship needed to be built on mutual respect, not paternalistic concern or financial opportunism. Friday evening arrived with a crispness in the air that hinted at the coming winter. I had prepared a simple but elegant meal: roasted chicken with herbs, wild rice pilaf, a salad of mixed greens with pears and walnuts. Nothing too elaborate. That might suggest I was trying to soften the blow of difficult news, but dignified enough to show I took the occasion seriously. Olivia and James arrived precisely at 6, both dressed more formally than our usual family dinners warranted. Olivia carried a bouquet of autumn flowers, a peace offering perhaps, or an attempt to establish a positive tone before what she anticipated would be a challenging conversation. "These are lovely," I said, accepting them with a genuine smile. "Thank you." "The house looks beautiful, Mom," Olivia commented as I led them into the living room. "You've made some changes." She was right. In the weeks since Janet's visit, I'd continued the process of refreshing my home environment. I'd rearranged the living room furniture to create a more conversational setup, replaced the heavy drapes with lighter window treatments that allowed more natural light, and added several new houseplants that brought vibrant green energy to the space. "Just a few updates," I acknowledged. It felt like time for a refresh. James glanced around, his eyes lingering on the study door, which stood slightly ajar, revealing the edge of my new desk and the colorful artwork on the walls. "Is that a new room?" he asked. "I don't remember that setup before." "It's the old guest room," I explained. "I've converted it into a home office and project space. Would you like to see it?" Without waiting for an answer, I led them into my new sanctuary. The transformation was dramatic. From a cluttered storage space to an organized, inspiring work area with a beautiful cherry wood desk, ergonomic chair, built-in bookshelves, and large corkboard covered with notes, articles, and a calendar marked with my various commitments and activities. "This is..." Olivia began, then paused, seemingly at a loss for words. "This is quite professional." "Thank you," I said simply. "I find having a dedicated space helps me stay focused and productive." "Productive doing what exactly?" James asked, scanning the materials on my desk with barely concealed curiosity. "Various projects," I replied vaguely. "Financial management, travel research, my tutoring materials for the community college program." "Tutoring?" Olivia echoed. "You didn't mention you were actually doing that." "I started 2 weeks ago," I explained. 3 mornings a week, I help adult learners who are struggling with college-level mathematics. It's quite rewarding." Before, they could ask further questions. I guided them back to the dining room where I'd already set the table with my best china and linens, not to impress them, but to set a tone of formality and importance for the evening ahead. Throughout dinner, conversation remained relatively light. We discussed the children's activities, James's work projects, neighborhood developments. But beneath the pleasant exchanges ran a current of anticipation, even tension. Olivia kept glancing at the clock, clearly waiting for Patricia's arrival, and the real purpose of the evening to begin. At precisely 7:30, the doorbell rang. I excused myself to answer it, returning moments later with Patricia, who greeted Olivia and James with professional cordiality. "Shall we move to the living room?" I suggested after introductions were complete. "I've made coffee, and there's dessert if anyone would like some." Once we were settled, Patricia and I on the sofa, Olivia and James in matching armchairs across from us, I began the conversation I'd been preparing for weeks. "Thank you both for coming tonight," I said, my voice steady and confident. "As I mentioned, I've finalized my estate plan and wanted to share the relevant details with you. Patricia has been instrumental in helping me create arrangements that reflect my wishes and protect my interests." Olivia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Mom, this all seems very formal and adversarial. Estate planning should be a family discussion, not something you do with lawyers behind closed doors." "I understand why you might feel that way," I acknowledged, but recent events suggested that a more structured approach was necessary. "What recent events?" James asked, his tone carefully neutral. I met his gaze directly. The repeated suggestions that I might be experiencing cognitive decline, the multiple attempts to gain access to my financial accounts, the proposals that I should move to assisted living despite being in excellent health. All of these indicated that my autonomy might be at risk without clear legal protections in place. Olivia's face flushed. "That's not fair, Mom. We were concerned about you, not trying to control you." "Perhaps," I conceded. But the effect was the same. And rather than continue a cycle of mistrust and misunderstanding, I decided to establish clear parameters that would address everyone's legitimate interests. Patricia opened her briefcase and removed several folders. "I've prepared a summary document that outlines the key elements of Eleanor's estate plan. Before I distribute these, I want to emphasize that all of the arrangements are legally binding and have been properly executed. We're sharing this information as a courtesy, not as an invitation for negotiation or modification." James leaned forward slightly, his financier's instincts clearly engaged. "What kind of arrangements are we talking about exactly?" Patricia handed each of them a bound document. "As outlined in this summary, Eleanor has established a revocable living trust that now holds the majority of her assets. She serves as the primary trustee, with Janet designated as successor trustee should Eleanor become genuinely incapacitated, a determination that would require certification from multiple independent physicians." Olivia flipped through the document, her expression darkening. "Janet? Why Janet and not me?" "Because Janet has demonstrated respect for my autonomy," I said gently but firmly. "She has shown that she can support me without trying to control me." James was scanning the document more methodically, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This trust appears quite restrictive in terms of distribution parameters." "It is," Patricia confirmed. "The trust includes specific provisions regarding how and when assets can be distributed, both during Eleanor's lifetime and after her passing. These provisions ensure that her wishes are honored exactly as she's specified them." "And what exactly are those wishes?" Olivia asked, an edge creeping into her voice. "How does this affect our inheritance?" I took a deep breath, maintaining eye contact with my daughter. "The trust provides for both of you and the grandchildren, but in a more structured way than a simple inheritance. There's an educational trust established specifically for Emma and Noah's college expenses. There are provisions for certain family, heirlooms and personal items to come to you, Olivia. And yes, there is a financial component for both of you as well. But, James prompted, clearly sensing there was more. But the bulk of my estate will be divided between the Educational Trust, a charitable foundation in Thomas's name focused on mathematics education, and a series of staggered distributions to family members based on specific milestones and conditions. Olivia's eyes widened. Conditions? What kind of conditions? Patricia interjected smoothly. Page 7 outlines the distribution structure in detail. Essentially, the trust is designed to reward behavior that aligns with Eleanor's values: respect, for education, financial responsibility, charitable giving, and family harmony. James flipped to the indicated page, scanning it quickly. This is unusual. It's controlling, Olivia corrected, her voice rising. It's trying to manipulate us from beyond the grave. It's my money, I reminded her quietly. I've earned the right to determine how it's distributed according to my values. But we're your family, Olivia protested. Doesn't that count for anything? It counts for a great deal, I assured her. That's why you're included in my estate. Plan it all. But being family doesn't entitle you to dictate how I manage my assets or to inherit them unconditionally. James was still reading, his expression growing increasingly concerned. It says here that you've placed your home in a life estate arrangement that guarantees your right to live here for the remainder of your life. That's correct, Patricia confirmed. Even if ownership of the property eventually transfers to Olivia or anyone else, Eleanor cannot be forced to leave or sell during her lifetime. Why would you think that was necessary? Olivia demanded, genuine hurt now visible beneath her anger. Did you actually believe we would try to force you out of your own home? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I believed it was prudent to protect myself against any well-intentioned but misguided attempts to determine where and how I should live as I age. Like your suggestion that she downsize to assisted living, James murmured to Olivia, who shot him an irritated glance. That was one comment made out of concern, she protested. I wasn't trying to force you into anything, Mom. Perhaps not consciously, I acknowledged. But the implication was clear, that you believed you knew better than I did about where I should live and how I should manage my affairs. Olivia shook her head in disbelief. So this is all punishment because I expressed concern about you, living alone after a fender bender? It's not punishment, I corrected firmly. It's protection. And it's not just about the fender bender or any single incident. It's about a pattern of behavior that suggested you view me primarily as an aging parent to be managed rather than as an autonomous individual deserving of respect. Patricia interjected before Olivia could respond. I'd like to draw your attention to Section 4 of the summary, which outlines the transparency measures Eleanor has incorporated into her plan. Both Olivia and James reluctantly turned their attention back to the document. As you'll see, Patricia continued, Eleanor has arranged for an annual financial disclosure report to be prepared by my office and shared with both of you. This report will provide a general overview of her financial status, major expenditures, and any significant changes to her estate plan. This transparency is offered as a courtesy and a demonstration of Eleanor's ongoing capability, not as an invitation for oversight or intervention. James nodded slowly, seeming to appreciate the strategic elegance of this arrangement. So, we'll be informed but not involved. Precisely, Patricia confirmed. Unless and until there is documented medical evidence of genuine incapacity, not just concern or difference of opinion, Eleanor retains complete control over her financial and personal affairs. Olivia closed the document with a sharp snap. I can't believe this is happening. My own mother treating me like some kind of predator she needs protection from. That's not how I see it, I said gently. I'm establishing healthy boundaries that protect everyone's interests, mine, yours, the grandchildren's, even the causes that matter to me. Healthy boundaries? Olivia repeated incredulously. You've built a legal fortress around yourself. How is that healthy? Sometimes, clear structures actually improve relationships by removing ambiguity and potential conflict, Patricia observed. Many families find that once the financial aspects are clearly defined, they can focus on the emotional and personal dimensions of their connections without underlying tensions about money or control. James, ever the practical one, seemed to be processing the information more analytically than his wife. So just to be clear, this is all finalized? There's no room for discussion or adjustment? The documents have been executed, Patricia confirmed. Eleanor can make modifications if she chooses, but no one else can compel changes to these arrangements. Olivia stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, visibly struggling to contain her emotions. I just can't believe you did all this, without even talking to us first, like we're adversaries instead of family. I remained seated, maintaining my calm demeanor. I made these arrangements precisely because recent interactions suggested we might be moving toward an adversarial relationship, one where my wishes and autonomy would be subordinated to your ideas about what was best for me. That's not fair, Olivia insisted. Everything I've done has been out of love and concern. I believe that's partly true, I acknowledged, but I also believe there were other factors at play, perhaps unconscious ones related to control and financial interest. Are you accusing me of being after your money? Olivia demanded, her voice rising. Is that what this is about? I met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting that your interest in helping me manage my affairs seemed to intensify significantly after you learned about the extent of my assets. Before that, you were content to let me handle my own finances. James cleared his throat uncomfortably. That's a serious accusation, Eleanor. It's an observation based on a pattern of behavior, I corrected. And it's part of why these legal structures became necessary. Patricia gently redirected the conversation. Rather than focusing on past concerns, perhaps we could discuss how to move forward constructively. The arrangements Eleanor has made actually create a framework for positive family relationships by removing financial ambiguity and pressure. Positive relationships? Olivia echoed incredulously. How are we supposed to have a positive relationship when my own mother clearly doesn't trust me? Trust is earned through respect, I reminded her. If you want me to trust you with my financial affairs, start by respecting my right to manage them independently as long as I'm capable of doing so. And how do we even know if you're capable? Olivia shot back. You won't let us be involved enough to make that determination. That determination isn't yours to make, Patricia interjected firmly. As outlined in Section 2, any assessment of Eleanor's capacity would require certification from multiple independent physicians, not simply the opinion of family members who might have conflicts of interest. James was still reviewing the document, his expression thoughtful. There's a provision here about quarterly family meetings. What's the purpose of those? Patricia turned to the relevant section. Eleanor has suggested regular family gatherings, separate from holiday celebrations or casual visits, specifically to discuss family matters, including financial updates, healthcare considerations, and any concerns or questions related to her estate plan. These meetings would provide a structured opportunity for open communication without disrupting other family interactions. So we'd have formally scheduled times to discuss your finances, Olivia said flatly. How clinical. How constructive, I countered. It creates appropriate boundaries while still ensuring you're informed and involved. Olivia shook her head, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. I just don't understand how we got here, Mom. When did our relationship become so adversarial? The genuine pain in her voice touched me, despite my determination to remain firm. I think it started the moment you decided I needed managing, rather than supporting. When concern became control, when you began seeing me as diminished, rather than simply aging. That's not what happened, she insisted. Isn't it? I asked quietly. Let me ask you something, Olivia. If I were 20 years younger but experiencing the exact same occasional memory lapses or minor accidents, would you immediately jump to questioning my cognitive capacity? Or would you simply see them as the normal human errors that everyone experiences occasionally? She didn't answer immediately, which was perhaps answer enough. The issue isn't that you were concerned, I continued gently. It's that your response to that concern was to try to take over, rather than to help me develop strategies to maintain my independence. You saw me as a problem to be managed, not as a person with agency and dignity who might need different kinds of support as I age. James, who had been relatively quiet throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. She has a point, Liv. We did move pretty quickly from Mom had a fender bender to Mom needs us to take over her finances. Olivia turned to him, betrayal evident in her expression. Whose side are you on? I'm not taking sides, he said carefully. I'm just acknowledging that maybe our approach wasn't entirely respectful of Eleanor's autonomy. Patricia seized this opening. That's precisely why these legal structures can actually be beneficial for your family relationships. They create clear parameters that protect Eleanor's independence while still ensuring she has support when and if she genuinely needs it. The quarterly meetings, the annual financial disclosures, the specific provisions for healthcare decisions, all of these create a framework for constructive engagement without crossing boundaries. Olivia remained unconvinced, her arms crossed defensively. It still feels like you're shutting us out, Mom. I'm setting boundaries, I corrected gently. That's not the same as shutting you out. You're still my daughter. Emma and Noah are still my grandchildren. I still want you in my life, just not in control of it. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Patricia allowed it to stretch for a moment before speaking again. I suggest you both take some time to review the complete document, she said, addressing Olivia and James. It contains a great deal of information to process. If you have specific questions about how various provisions work or what they mean for your family, I'm happy to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss those details. James nodded, closing his copy of the summary. That seems reasonable. Liv? Olivia didn't respond immediately, her expression still stormy with hurt and frustration. Finally, she gave a curt nod. Fine, we'll review it. But I want to be clear, Mom. This feels like a massive overreaction to a few well-intentioned comments about your well-being. I understand you see it that way, I acknowledged. From my perspective, it's a necessary response to protect myself from what felt like escalating attempts to diminish my autonomy. Perhaps with time and reflection, we can find middle ground in how we understand what happened and why. Patricia gathered her materials and prepared to leave. I'll be in touch to schedule that follow-up meeting if you decide you'd like one. And Eleanor, we should plan to connect next week to discuss any questions or concerns that might arise from tonight's conversation. After seeing Patricia out, I returned to find Olivia and James standing awkwardly in the living room, clearly ready to depart as well. We should probably go, Olivia said stiffly. It's getting late and we have a lot to process. I nodded, accepting that pushing for further conversation tonight would likely be counterproductive. Of course, thank you for coming. James shook my hand formally, a gesture that felt oddly appropriate given the evening's businesslike tone. We'll be in touch after we've had time to review everything. Olivia hesitated at the door, turning back to face me with a mixture of hurt and confusion still evident in her expression. I just want you to know, Mom. Whatever you might think, I do love you. Everything I've done has been because I care. I know you care, I said softly, and I love you too. That's why I hope we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than concern that becomes control." She nodded slightly, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to argue further. "Good night, Mom." After they left, I sat alone in my living room, emotionally drained but also experiencing a profound sense of relief. The confrontation I'd been dreading was finally over. My legal protections were in place. My boundaries had been clearly articulated. Whether Olivia and James would ultimately accept and respect those boundaries remained to be seen. But I had taken the necessary steps to secure my autonomy regardless of their reaction. As I was preparing for bed, my phone rang, Janet calling from Arizona, right on schedule. "Well?" she asked without preamble. "How did it go?" I sighed, settling onto the edge of my bed. "About as expected." Olivia was hurt and angry. James was calculating and strategic. Patricia was professional and supportive. "And you? How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. Exhausted, sad that it came to this, but also liberated. Like I've finally laid down a burden I've been carrying for too long. "The burden of trying to meet impossible expectations," Janet suggested. "Exactly," I agreed. The expectation that I should sacrifice my autonomy to ease Olivia's anxiety about my aging. The expectation that I should hand over control of my assets because I'm past some arbitrary age where independent financial management is deemed appropriate. "Well, I'm proud of you," Janet said firmly. "Standing up for yourself like this took real courage, especially knowing it would hurt Olivia's feelings." "That was the hardest part," I admitted, seeing how genuinely hurt she was, but I keep reminding myself that her hurt feelings don't invalidate my legitimate need for boundaries and protection. "Exactly right," Janet affirmed. "And who knows? Once she's had time to process everything, she might develop a new respect for your strength and foresight." "Perhaps," I said, though without much conviction. "Or this might create a permanent rift between us." "If it does, that's on her, not you," Janet insisted. "You've been more than fair, including her in your estate plan despite her behavior, creating transparency measures, even establishing regular family meetings to maintain communication. If she can't respect your autonomy even with those accommodations, then the problem is hers to solve, not yours." After we hung up, I completed my bedtime routine with a strange mixture of emotions. Regret that my relationship with Olivia had deteriorated to this point, but pride in the steps I'd taken to protect myself and establish a new chapter of my life defined by growth rather than decline. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking not about the confrontation or its potential fallout, but about the tutoring session I had scheduled for Monday morning. One of my students, a woman in her 40s returning to school after raising her children, had been struggling with algebraic concepts. I'd developed a new approach to explain these ideas using visual models that I thought might help her break through her mental blocks. It was this: the ongoing capacity to learn, to teach, to contribute meaningfully to others' lives, that I was fighting to preserve. Not just my financial assets or my physical independence, but my identity as a thinking, growing, evolving human being with value beyond my role as someone's mother or grandmother. And that, I realized as sleep finally claimed me, was worth any difficult conversation or painful confrontation. That was worth fighting for, with all the tools and strategies at my disposal. That was the essence of the dignity I was determined to maintain, for all the years that remained to me. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Olivia again. In that time, I continued with my newly established routines, tutoring at the community college, attending my fitness classes, working in the community garden, meeting with my financial advisor to review my portfolio. I kept myself busy, productive, and engaged, trying not to dwell on the pain I'd seen in my daughter's eyes during our last encounter. When she finally called, her voice was carefully neutral. Mom, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee tomorrow. Just the two of us. I'd like that, I said, relief washing over me. Whatever came next, at least we were still talking. How about that little cafe near the library? Say, 10 o'clock. Perfect, she agreed. I'll see you then. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, selecting a quiet table in the corner that would afford us some privacy for what might be a difficult conversation. I ordered a cappuccino and waited, trying to quell the nervous flutter in my stomach. So much was at stake, not my financial security or legal autonomy, which I'd already secured, but something far more precious: my relationship with my only child. Olivia arrived precisely at 10, dressed in the professional attire she typically wore to her interior design firm. She looked tired, I thought. Shadows under her eyes suggesting restless nights, perhaps wrestling with the same concerns that had kept me awake. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she settled into the chair across from mine. She ordered a latte from the hovering waitress, then turned her full attention to me. "I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about our conversation with Patricia. James and I have reviewed all the documents thoroughly." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "At first I was just hurt and angry," she admitted. "It felt like such a rejection, like you were punishing me for caring about you." "That was never my intention," I said softly. "I know that now," Olivia acknowledged. After the initial reaction faded, I started really thinking about things, from your perspective, about how my concern must have felt to you, about the way I spoke to you, the tone, the assumptions. She paused as the waitress delivered her latte, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. And I realized something uncomfortable, she continued after the waitress departed. "I have been treating you differently since Dad died. Not just since the fender bender or the misplaced checkbook, but for years now. Subtly at first, but increasingly obvious." "How so?" I asked, genuinely curious about her self-reflection. "Little things," she said. "Explaining simple concepts to you that you obviously already understand. Taking over tasks you're perfectly capable of handling. Making decisions without consulting you. Speaking to you in that patient, condescending tone people use with children." She grimaced. "The tone I hate when other parents use it with Emma and Noah." I nodded, surprised and touched by her insight. "It's a common pattern, I think. Roles gradually reverse as parents age and children mature. But in my case, that reversal started happening long before it was warranted." "Exactly," Olivia agreed. "And when I really examined my motivations honestly, I had to admit that it wasn't just about concern for your well-being. There was an element of control, of wanting to position myself as the authority figure in our relationship." "That couldn't have been an easy realization," I observed. She gave a rueful smile. "No, it wasn't. Especially when James pointed out that my behavior toward you escalated right around the time we started having serious financial concerns about the kids' college funds." I raised an eyebrow, surprised at her candor. "Not that I was consciously planning to access your money," she hastened to add. "But knowing you had significant assets probably made me more attentive to how you were managing them. More inclined to insert myself into your financial affairs under the guise of helping." "And now?" I asked quietly. "How do you feel about the arrangements I've made?" Olivia took a sip of her latte, considering. "Honestly, they're remarkably fair. Better than I deserved, given how I've been behaving. The educational trust for the kids is incredibly generous. The quarterly family meetings are a reasonable compromise. Even the distribution conditions make sense. They reflect your values and priorities." Relief washed over me, unexpected in its intensity. "I'm glad you see it that way. I was afraid you would view the whole thing as a rejection or punishment." "I did at first," she admitted. "But after really examining the documents and my own behavior, I realized you were simply protecting yourself from my overreach while still providing generously for your family. It was a wake-up call, Mom. An uncomfortable but necessary one. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us softening into something more thoughtful. So where do we go from here? I finally asked. Olivia met my gaze directly. I'd like us to start over in a way. To rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than the parent-child dynamic that no longer fits who we are. I want to see you, really see you as the capable, independent woman you are, not just as my mother who needs managing. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome in this public setting. I'd like that very much. I think the quarterly family meetings will actually help with that, Olivia continued. Having a designated time to discuss financial and practical matters means our regular interactions can focus on simply enjoying each other's company without those underlying tensions. That was the idea, I acknowledged, to create appropriate boundaries and contexts for different aspects of our relationship. Olivia reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture of connection that felt more genuine than any we'd shared in months. I owe you an apology, Mom. A real one, not just because I'm worried about my inheritance. I'm sorry for trying to control you under the guise of helping you, for not respecting your autonomy, for treating you as diminished when you're anything but. I squeezed her hand, emotion tightening my throat. Thank you for that. It means more than I can say. And I want you to know, she added, that I've talked to James about our approach going forward. We're both committed to supporting your independence rather than trying to manage it, to offering help when asked rather than imposing it, to treating you as the capable adult you are for as long as you are that person, which, based on what I've seen lately, could be for many years to come. We spent the next hour talking more openly than we had in years, about her work challenges, my volunteer activities, books we'd read, ideas we'd been exploring. Not once did she ask about my finances or suggest I needed help with any aspect of my life. Instead, she listened attentively when I described my tutoring experiences, asked thoughtful questions about my upcoming travel plans with the senior explorers, and even solicited my advice about a difficult client situation she was navigating. It felt like conversing with a peer, an equal, rather than engaging in the stilted hierarchical interactions that had characterized our recent relationship. By the time we finished our second round of coffee, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Our relationship wasn't restored to perfect harmony, but we had taken an important first step toward a healthier, more balanced connection. As we prepared to leave, Olivia asked hesitantly, "Would you like to come for dinner on Sunday? The kids have been asking about you." "I'd love that," I said sincerely. "And I've been meaning to ask, how are they doing with their science fair projects?" Noah mentioned he was having trouble with his experimental design. "He is," Olivia confirmed. "Actually, he could probably use some help from someone with your mathematical background. Would you mind talking through it with him on Sunday?" "Not at all," I replied, warmed by the implied acknowledgement of my continued intellectual capabilities. "I'd be happy to." We parted with a genuine hug, not the perfunctory embrace of recent months, but a warm connection that felt like the beginning of healing. The following Sunday dinner was noticeably different from our previous gatherings. James greeted me with genuine warmth rather than the slightly patronizing solicitude I'd grown accustomed to. Emma eagerly showed me her debate team medals and asked detailed questions about my community college tutoring program. Noah and I spent an hour at the dining room table after the meal, working through the statistical analysis for his science fair project on plant growth under different light conditions. Not once did anyone offer unsolicited help with simple tasks, ask leading questions about my memory or finances, or exchange worried glances when I mentioned future plans. The atmosphere was relaxed, natural, respectful, as family gatherings should be. As I was preparing to leave, Olivia walked me to my car. This was nice, she said simply. It felt normal, like we used to be. Better, I think, I replied. More balanced. She nodded in agreement. I've been thinking about what you said, about how your financial arrangements aren't about punishing me, but about protecting yourself. I get that now. And I want you to know that I respect your decisions, not just because I legally have to, but because I recognize they're thoughtful and fair. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved by her understanding. That means a great deal to me. Over. The following months, our relationship continued to evolve in positive directions. The first quarterly family meeting, held in Patricia's office, was businesslike but cordial. We reviewed my financial status. Excellent. Discussed any concerns or questions about the trust arrangements, minimal, and confirmed the next meeting date. The entire process took less than an hour and ended with no arguments or tension, just clarity and mutual understanding. With the financial aspects of our relationship now clearly defined and professionally managed, Olivia and I were free to focus on rebuilding our personal connection. We began meeting for lunch every other week, just the two of us, talking about everything from books to politics to family memories. She asked about my tutoring students with genuine interest. I inquired about her design projects with real curiosity. We rediscovered the easy rapport we'd enjoyed when she was younger, before concern became control and love became obligation. The changes in my own life continued as well. My volunteer work at the community college expanded from tutoring to occasionally substituting for instructors in introductory mathematics courses. My participation in the community garden led to a leadership role on its governing committee. My fitness regimen resulted in measurable improvements in my strength, balance, and endurance. And in the spring, I joined the senior explorers for their trip to the national parks of Utah, my first significant journey since Thomas's passing. For 10 days, I hiked, moderately, through breathtaking landscapes, shared meals and conversations with newfound friends, and slept in rustic lodges beneath star-filled skies. I returned home refreshed, invigorated, and already planning my next adventure. When Olivia picked me up from the airport, she seemed genuinely excited to hear about my experiences. "You look wonderful, Mom," she said as we drove home. "There's a glow about you, a vitality I haven't seen in years." "I feel wonderful," I admitted. "More alive than I have since your father died, maybe even before that." She glanced at me, curiously. "What do you think made the difference?" I considered the question carefully. "Clarity," I said finally. "Knowing that my autonomy is secure, that my boundaries will be respected, that I can grow and explore without constantly defending my right to do so." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "It's ironic. I was so worried about you declining that I almost prevented you from flourishing." "We all make mistakes," I said gently. "What matters is our willingness to recognize them and change course." A year has passed since that difficult Friday evening when I first presented my estate plan to Olivia and James. In that time, so much has changed, not just in practical arrangements, but in attitudes, understanding, and mutual respect. Quarterly family meetings continue, providing a structured forum for financial and practical discussions that keeps our regular interactions free from those underlying tensions. The educational trust for Emma and Noah is growing steadily, ensuring they'll have the resources they need when college time arrives. My volunteer work, fitness regimen, and social activities keep me engaged, stimulated, and connected to my community. But the most significant change has been in my relationship with Olivia. Gone is the patronizing concern, the subtle infantilization, the assumption of decline. In its place has emerged a balanced adult relationship characterized by mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives and perspectives. Last week, as we shared lunch at our regular cafe, Olivia made an observation that touched me deeply. "You know, Mom," she said thoughtfully, When you first changed your will and created all those legal structures, I felt so hurt and rejected. I couldn't understand why you felt you needed such elaborate protections from your own daughter. And now? I prompted gently. Now I see it was never about shutting me out, she replied. It was about creating the conditions that would allow us to have a healthy relationship. By establishing those clear boundaries, you actually made it possible for us to connect more authentically. That was my hope, I acknowledged, though I wasn't sure it would work out that way. It's like what you always taught me about mathematics, Olivia continued, surprising me with the analogy. Sometimes you need to establish the parameters of a problem before you can find its solution. I smiled, touched by her insight and the echo of my teaching career. Exactly. Clear boundaries don't constrain authentic relationships. They enable them by removing harmful ambiguity and power imbalances. As I reflect on this journey from conflict to understanding, from control to respect, I'm struck by how often life's most valuable lessons arrive disguised as its most painful challenges. My daughter's attempt to manage my finances became the catalyst for a profound transformation in our relationship, one that might never have occurred without that initial conflict. And in standing firm for my autonomy, I discovered strengths I hadn't fully recognized in myself: courage, clarity, strategic thinking, and an unwavering commitment to living authentically for all my remaining years. The memory lapses still happen occasionally. I misplace my reading glasses, forget a name, lose track of a bill. But now these ordinary human errors are just that. Normal occurrences that happen to people of all ages, not evidence of inevitable decline or reasons to surrender my independence. More importantly, I've stopped measuring my worth by my memory or my physical capabilities. I am more than my occasional forgetfulness, more than my gray hair and lined face, more than the number of years I've accumulated. I am a whole, complex, evolving human being with value that transcends my role as someone's mother or grandmother. That revelation, that I am worthy of respect and dignity simply because I exist, not because of what I can do or provide for others, has been the most profound gift of this difficult journey. It's a truth I hope to carry with me through whatever years remain, and one I hope my example might illuminate for others facing similar challenges. As for my will, it remains exactly as I structured it, with one small but significant modification. I've added a letter to be read after my passing, not a legal document, but a personal message expressing my love for Olivia, my pride in the growth she's demonstrated, and my gratitude for the balanced, respectful relationship we've built in these later years. Because in the end, the most valuable inheritance I can leave my daughter isn't money or property or personal possessions. It's the example of a woman who stood firmly for her own worth and dignity, who refused to be diminished by others' expectations or fears, and who continued growing, learning, and evolving until her final breath. That's a legacy worth remembering, and worth changing a will to protect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.